Welcome back to another episode of Fearless, where you are catching us in the middle of an 8-part series where we are looking at some of the 8 top issues going into the political season and looking at them from a biblical perspective. As a woman, there are many issues I care about going into the election. I'm just not a single issue voter. Some of you might be. But one of the top issues for me is immigration and national security. As a mom raising my children, I worry about our enemies around the world and how they view our nation. And I just kind of looked at the disorder that we have seen at the southern border. So today, we're going to look at the topic of immigration. And imagine that you are sitting at home watching TV on a Friday night and you hear fumbling at your door. And you get up, and as you're walking to your door, you hear it break and smash in, and in walks a family. You don't know this family. You didn't invite anybody over. And all of a sudden, they demand you to feed them and take care of them. And you're going to do all of that. You don't know if they're sick or healthy, if they're dangerous or just need help and security. You know nothing about them. But on your own financial dollar, you are told that you have to feed them, house them, and take care of them, and provide for their medical needs. And that's what's happening every day at our borders. And it sounds dramatic, and it's not, because that's what we're seeing on a daily basis. There is no law and order, and it's just pure chaos down there. And as Christians, how do we look at that? God's word tells us to help those that are in need. We are called to live a life of compassionate service. And in Matthew 22:39, it says, we are told you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And that's what I've been taught my entire life under the umbrella of my dad and the work he does at Samaritan's Purse and the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. We are to go help those people in their greatest needs in the ditches of life who are facing the storms of life. But does this mean we should leave our front doors unlocked for anyone and everyone just to come right on through? And of course, this is the dilemma that our country is facing. Millions of people are crossing the U.S. border, and many do not have permission to enter. And when these migrants arrive at our southern border, many have no approval to stay. There's no work authorization, no driver's license, and no place to go. And they're coming to look for opportunities, but some have taken advantage of the situation and suffer terribly along the journey as they're coming to the U.S. And then after they arrive, they either get lost in a very overwhelmed immigration system, or they get bypassed and totally miss the legal process entirely and avoid detection. This doesn't just hurt immigrants. Everyone suffers when there's instability and our safety is at risk, and when our resources are just badly strained at the border. And as Christians, how should we respond to this crisis in a way that's loving to all those who are around us, while remembering 1 Corinthians 14:33 that says, for God is not a God of disorder, but a God of peace. And I think this is a subject that has been distorted by so many Christian influencers over the last few years. I mean, sometimes we see slogans like Jesus was an immigrant, and using that to draw at our heartstrings of compassion. I mean, I live in Florida. And over the last few years, I've become good friends with people who've come across the border or whose parents brought them over. And now that they're dreamers and they're trying to live the American dream. And so I think this issue for now, when we look at how many dreamers that we have in our country, this has become a personal issue for us. But God established the universe and provided clear directives to the Israelites. We look at through the 10 Commandments. He gave strict instructions on how they were to organize their camp, how they were to deal with their enemies, and how they were even to set clear borders according to Exodus 23. And he did all of this for their protection. He did all of this to create order for them. And when we operate outside the contrary of God's plan, confusion and chaos reign, and people get hurt. And sadly, that's what's happening in our country. And Christians don't often know how to view this situation. My dad has said the job of the church is to love people, but the job of the government is to provide careful security for its citizens. And I agree with that. Our first responsibility as Christians is to care and to love people, regardless of their immigration status. Leviticus 19:33 says, whenever a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. And part of loving people is doing all we can to make sure that they are not being mistreated. And sadly, we've seen these scenes play out in story after story coming through Latin America, that many women and children who are making this journey because they've heard our borders are open, who are making this journey to come live the American dream, they are taken advantage of. They are sex trafficked. There's drug lords preying on them because they are the vulnerable ones. And there are just countless stories of robbery and abuse to these women and children making this trek. And the ease of crossing our border is leading to record numbers of people. And they put themselves in harm's way to take great risk, which when you hear these stories, they are heart-wrenching. And at the same time, as Christians, we have the responsibility to care about the state of our country and the safety of our own citizens. And as a mother, national security is one of my greatest concerns going into this election. It is disturbing to me to see the lack of vetting that is happening at the southern border and how many people are crossing. And when there's a lack of vetting, what's going to happen? Our enemies are going to take full advantage of the lack of vetting. And according to the House Judiciary Committee, over 5 million undocumented migrants have crossed into the country over the past 4 years. Just in 4 years, 5 million undocumented migrants. During 2023 fiscal year, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection released a report stating that Border Patrol agents encountered 169 people on the terrorist watch list. This summer, 8 Tajikistan nationals with suspected ties to ISIS were arrested. They crossed the southern border and passed through the government screening process without raising any flags. And it wasn't until they were on their way to New York and Los Angeles and Philadelphia that the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force and U.S. Immigration Customs Enforcement took them into custody. So there are real safety threats facing the U.S. and migrants alike. And when we look what's happening, police officers have been violently attacked, young women have been raped and murdered on the trek on the way up, and people have been killed in DUI crashes involving illegal immigrants. And I have a personal story. A person I went to high school was killed in an accident with an illegal immigrant. And in addition to safety, it's financial resources and human resources that are stretched critically thin in border communities and in large cities around our country. And many people face dangers on both sides of the border. And this is one of the biggest issues of this election year. And it should be. This is something we have to be talking about, but we have to be looking at it through the right lens. A study at Lifeway Research found that evangelicals are increasingly concerned about the number of recent immigrants in the U.S., but still believe that Christians have a responsibility to care for those who are in our country illegally. We as Americans, we live in an amazing country. That's why so many people want to come to it. It really is America the Beautiful. And I don't blame anyone for wanting to come to the United States, a land of economic opportunity, and that's what our country was founded on. I never get tired of hearing people's stories that have come to this country, they've left desperate situations behind, and they've come and they have lived out the American dream. It is inspiring, everyone you hear. And for centuries, people from all over the world came to this great nation because it does. It offers better conditions to raising a family. It offers religious freedom, access to quality health care. You have freedom of speech, better treatment of the poor. We have a democratic system. All of that is what people come here to live for and to make a better life for themselves. And I'm in favor of immigration, but I do believe it must be legal. From its founding, America has welcomed migrants, healthy workers who needed to settle and farm empty land. And many of the migrants who helped build this country came through Ellis Island, which is the gateway to the American dream. But immigrants didn't just walk onto American soil without being vetted first. They were inspected for health issues. Some were detained and deported. But more than 12 million immigrants passed through Ellis Island, and many as 5,000 people per day were granted entry into the United States. That is amazing when you look at our history. The lawful immigrant population of the United States continues to increase. So there are many who are coming through, and they are coming through the proper channels and obeying the law of the land, subjecting themselves to our governing authorities, which we're instructed to do in Romans 13. So how do we look at immigration from a biblical perspective while protecting our children and our families and other American citizens, yet also protecting and loving for the immigrant that's coming legally and illegally? And I believe as Christians, we can do both. that we can love this country, love security and national security and border control, yet also love those who want to come and live the American dream. But people, the American dream will die if we're not a land of order. If it's a land of chaos, the American dream dies for everyone. So that we have to protect both. And I do believe we as Christians can do both, to look at this and to remember, as the scriptures that I read in the beginning, for God is not a God of disorder, but of peace. And as Christians, we want people to know the ultimate peace. America's not going to provide the ultimate peace for everyone, but Jesus Christ will. And that's why it's so important that we as Christians keep our eyes focused, even through this election process and all the chaos and confusion that's going on the Prince of Peace. And that we love those around us, that's the job as Christians, but it's the job of our government to protect American citizens. If you're joining in the middle of this series, it is so important that you look at these issues from a biblical perspective that are affecting our country and leading up to this political election. So I encourage you, go check out how you can get your own prayer guide for this election on billygraham.org.